Rain slammed against the windshield in relentless waves, drumming a frantic rhythm as Maya Langston tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Her eyes squinted through the blurry haze of water and fog, tracing the winding mountain road ahead. She'd handled rush-hour traffic in Manhattan, dodged aggressive reporters, and faced boardroom battles where millions were at stake, but never had she felt this utterly powerless. The tires of her Range Rover splashed through puddles as they climbed higher into the North Carolina mountains. In the back seat, her 6-year-old daughter, Mia, lay curled up beneath a wool blanket, her cheeks flushed, lips slightly parted as shallow breaths escaped her. Maya stole a glance at her daughter through the rearview mirror, worry etching into her every feature. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she called back, keeping her voice steady. A weak whisper floated to the front seat. "If I fall asleep and don't wake up, would you be sad?" Maya froze. The words sliced through her like glass. She looked again in the mirror. Mia's eyes were open, dazed and glistening, gazing at the ceiling. That wasn't something a 6-year-old should say. It wasn't a child's question, it was a quiet plea born from too many missed bedtime stories, too many lonely dinners, and a mother's career that devoured all her time. Before Maya could answer, the engine sputtered violently and died. The dashboard lights blinked out. Headlights faded. The GPS monitor went black. She twisted the key. Nothing. She tapped the accelerator. Nothing. Her phone had no signal bars. Not one. The wind outside howled louder, as if the mountains themselves were warning her. "Don't worry, baby," she said, turning to look at Mia. "I'll call for help. Everything's going to be fine." But it wasn't. Not this time. Maya wrapped another blanket around Mia and tucked it tightly before opening the driver's side door. Cold air slapped her face. She pulled on her rain jacket and stepped into the storm, phone held high, turning in every direction, desperately searching for a signal. The sky loomed in endless gray, and the rain stung her cheeks like needles. And then through the curtain of rain came a flicker of light, a small beam, bobbing slightly, moving toward her from the forest edge. She froze. A man emerged tall, broad-shouldered, black, wearing a heavy canvas coat stained with dirt. His face was obscured beneath the hood, but his walk was calm, deliberate. "Car trouble?" he called out. Maya took a step back, instinctively gripping her car keys in her pocket. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I live nearby, cabin on the East Ridge." He gestured with the flashlight. "You've got a little girl in there, right?" Maya's heart pounded. "She's sick. There's no signal up here," he said, stepping a bit closer. "Storm knocked out the towers 2 days ago. You won't get through." She didn't answer. "I have medicine," he said. "Herbal, but real. I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor. I can help." Maya's mind raced. Every city instinct screamed no. But Mia's pale face behind the fogged window said yes. She didn't have time to gamble. She had already gambled too much. "If you hurt her," Maya said, "I swear." "You'll never have to," the man interrupted gently. "Name's Ezekiel." She opened the back door and scooped Mia into her arms. The girl whimpered but didn't resist. Wrapped in the blanket, she was as light as a whisper. Maya followed Ezekiel into the woods, the flashlight beam bouncing before them. Trees loomed tall and black in the storm. Roots threatened to trip her with every step, and the trail turned muddy beneath her boots. 10 minutes later, a small glow appeared through the Teresa cabin, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. The porch was covered, dried herbs hanging from its eaves, swaying in the wind. Ezekiel opened the door and motioned her inside. Warmth, soft golden light, the scent of cedarwood, dried mint, and something sweet like honey and soil. Shelves lined the walls, each filled with glass jars labeled in neat handwriting: chamomile, elderflower, white willow bark. A kettle sat over a wood stove, and Ezekiel moved swiftly, scooping herbs into it with practiced care. "She's burning up," Maya said, laying Mia on a small couch near the fire. "I've got it," Ezekiel replied, covering the girl with a wool blanket. He placed a damp cloth on Mia's forehead, then poured the herbal infusion into a mug and set it beside her. Maya stood nearby, arms crossed tightly, eyes darting to every corner. "Where did you learn all this?" "University of Vermont," he said. "Later trained with Cherokee herbalists in Oklahoma." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "You're exhausted," he noted, pulling a second mug from the shelf. "I'm fine," she lied. "You haven't slept well in years," he said, matter-of-factly. "It shows." She narrowed her eyes. That's the face of a successful CEO, Ezekiel chuckled. Or someone who's forgotten how to rest. He handed her the mug. Lemon balm and valerian root, nothing scary. She hesitated, then took it. The steam curled into her face. She smelled warmth, not bitterness. She sipped, then again. The warmth spread. Her eyes blinked slowly. She sat in a worn leather armchair, planning to stay alert, to protect Mia, to question this stranger further. But the chair cradled her like a mother's arms, and the fire's crackle hummed a lullaby she hadn't heard in years. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Ezekiel quietly turned down the lanterns. Mia, wrapped in layers and healing slowly, shifted in sleep. The storm outside raged on. But inside, for the first time in what felt like forever, everything was still. When Maya opened her eyes, the room was bathed in the soft gray light of dawn. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The scent of smoke and dried herbs lingered in the air. A low crackling came from the wood stove, and the cabin was blanketed in a gentle silence that felt foreign yet oddly comforting. She sat up slowly, realizing she was still in the leather armchair by the fire. Her neck ached slightly, but there was something else, a calmness she hadn't felt in years. No night sweats, no jolts awake, no vivid dreams of loss or boardroom disasters, just rest. Her eyes darted immediately to the couch. Mia lay there, nestled in a blanket, her color better, her chest rising and falling steadily. A warm rush flooded Maya's chest. She rose, knelt beside her daughter, and placed a hand on her forehead. The fever had broken. "You slept," a voice came from behind her. She turned. Ezekiel stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. He wore a thick flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, the collar slightly frayed. His expression was calm but observant. "I did," she said, still in disbelief. "How long?" "About 8 hours. Impossible." He set the mugs down. "That's what everyone says, until they do." Maya looked away, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to people who didn't fill silence with noise or self-importance. "You have a name?" he asked after a pause. "Maya Langston." His eyebrow lifted slightly, clearly recognizing the name. "Langston Holdings? Manhattan Real Estate?" She bristled. "Yes." "That a problem?" He shook his head. "Number, just not used to seeing your kind around here." She stood, crossing her arms. "My kind?" "The kind that builds glass towers in places that used to have trees." Maya didn't answer. Instead, she picked up the mug he'd set down for her. "What's in this one?" "Chamomile, passion flower, and a little skullcap. Nothing sedative, just gentle." She sipped cautiously. It was sweet, earthy, grounding. She hated how much she liked it. "Your daughter's strong," he said, walking over to check Mia's pulse with the back of his hand. "She was burning up when you brought her in, but she'll be fine now." The tea and warm compresses helped. Maya watched him. His movements were steady, deliberate, respectful, not clinical, but personal. There was no performance in him, no need to impress. She wasn't used to that. "Do you have kids?" she asked. He shook his head. "Number, just patience. And plants." "You live here alone?" "For now." Maya glanced around the cabin again. It was modest, but functional. No television, no Wi-Fi router, just books, wooden furniture, dried herbs, and photographs. One, in particular, caught her eye, a black and white image of a woman smiling in a garden. "Your mother?" she asked, nodding toward it. "Yes." "She teach you this?" She motioned toward the herbs. "She taught me how to listen. The plants taught me the rest." Maya scoffed softly, then stopped herself. She wasn't trying to be rude, just skeptical. "You're a doctor?" "Naturopathic physician," he confirmed. "Licensed in 3 states, graduated in 2008. Been working out here for the last 10 years. "Why here?" He hesitated, then answered, "Because sometimes healing requires quiet, and because this land belonged to my grandfather." Maya took another sip of tea, then walked to the window. The storm had passed. The forest looked reborn, dripping, alive, humming with unseen life. Mia stirred on the couch. Maya was at her side in an instant. "Mama," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm here, baby," Maya said, brushing hair from her daughter's damp forehead. "I had a dream," Mia murmured. "There was a big tree and a man with a light. He told me I was safe." Ezekiel said nothing. He just turned away, giving them privacy. Later that morning, Maya insisted on calling a tow truck. Ezekiel explained that they wouldn't get a signal until they got closer to the main road, still over an hour away on foot. Mia wasn't strong enough to walk it, and Maya wouldn't risk leaving her alone. So, reluctantly, she agreed to stay another night. Ezekiel offered her the guest cot. Maya refused. She'd sleep on the armchair again. Truth be told, it was the best rest she'd had in a decade. They passed the afternoon quietly. Ezekiel prepared a simple soup with lentils, carrots, and wild herbs. Maya couldn't name but found oddly delicious. Maya sat up long enough to eat some, then fell asleep again. At dusk, Maya stood outside on the porch, staring at the silhouette of the forest. "I don't do this," she said when Ezekiel joined her. "Do what?" "Rely on people, especially strangers, especially ones who live in cabins and make tea from tree bark." He smiled slightly, not offended. "Why'd you help us?" she asked. "You could have just walked past." "Because someone helped me once," he said simply. She waited for more. He didn't offer it. That, she realized, was his way. Inside, Mia stirred again. Maya went to her, smoothed the blanket over her chest. The firelight danced on the walls. She looked at her daughter, then back at the man who had, without pretense or promise, given them shelter. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to carry everything alone. That night, Maya drank the tea Ezekiel made for her without hesitation. She curled up in the armchair, blanket pulled to her chin. Sleep came easily. And this time, when it did, she didn't fight it. The next morning came slowly, the light creeping through the thin cotton curtains in gentle waves. Maya stirred in the armchair, arms curled to her chest, and for a few moments she simply lay still, wrapped in warmth and the scent of cedarwood, dried orange peel, and old books. She opened her eyes to the soft sound of pages turning. Ezekiel sat on a wooden bench across the room, reading from a thick, worn book. He looked up as she shifted. "Good morning," he said, his voice quiet but grounded. Maya stretched her legs out, eyes still heavy. "I slept again," he nodded. "Your body's remembering how." She glanced toward the couch. Mia was still asleep, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other loosely curled over the edge of her blanket. Her face looked less pale now, her lips no longer dry. She was resting, not in that medicated, artificial stillness hospitals sometimes gave, but truly resting. Maya whispered, "She looks okay." "She is. The fever broke fully last night. Her body just needs more time." Maya exhaled, then stood, her limbs slightly stiff. "You didn't sleep again." "I slept earlier," Ezekiel replied, marking his page and closing the book. "Sometimes I like mornings too much to miss them." Maya wandered toward the kitchen area and noticed a small pot on the stove. "You made tea again." "You could say that," he said. "Or you could say I was hoping you'd stay another day." She blinked. "Why would I do that?" "Because she's not ready to leave," he said, nodding at Mia. "And because neither are you." Maya leaned against the counter. "You're awfully sure of things." Ezekiel shrugged. "I've been wrong before, but not about this." There was no smugness in his voice, no ego, just observation. Maya hated how accurate he was. A part of her wanted to argue, to reassert control, but another part, a quieter one, knew he was right. They spent the morning in companionable quiet. Mia woke around 9, her voice raspy but her eyes brighter. She sat up slowly, leaning against her mother. "Where are we?" she asked. "In a cabin," Maya answered. "A safe one." Mia looked toward Ezekiel, who nodded with a gentle smile. "You scared us, kiddo, but you're stronger than most adults I've met." Mia smiled shyly and glanced around. "What's that smell?" "Tea," Maya said, brushing her daughter's hair back. "Real tea." By late morning, Ezekiel prepared a bowl of oatmeal with mashed apple and honey. Mia ate half before dozing off again. That afternoon, the storm had fully passed, leaving the world damp and shimmering. Ezekiel stood on the porch cleaning bundles of herbs, while Maya stepped outside, wrapping her coat tighter. The air was crisp, but the sun peeked through in golden streaks. "I haven't had a day this quiet in years," she said. "It's not quiet," Ezekiel replied without looking up. "You're just hearing different things." She tilted her head. "Like what?" He looked at her then, a slow glance. "Like birds, water dripping, the sound of your own breath, your daughter breathing." Maya didn't answer. She looked out toward the woods, where sunlight touched the branches, and for once her phone didn't buzz, and she didn't check the time. Most people can't handle the silence, Ezekiel said after a pause. It reminds them what they've been avoiding. She smiled bitterly. You don't pull punches, do you? Never found them helpful. Maya turned back toward the cabin. I don't know if I'm avoiding anything. That's possible, he said, but unlikely. She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the smirk tugging at her lips. That evening, Ezekiel set up a small table near the window. On it, he placed 3 plates sewn for each of them. The meal was simple: roasted squash, wild greens, and cornbread. No sauces, no garnish, just food prepared with care. As they ate, Ezekiel shared stories of patience, plants, and his mother's laughter when he misidentified wild parsley for hemlock. Mia giggled softly. Maya laughed aloud for the first time in weeks. After dinner, Ezekiel pulled out a carved wooden box. Inside were small painted figures, rabbits, squirrels, and a tiny man with a tall hat. Mia leaned forward. Who's he? That's Dr. Root, Ezekiel said. He listens to the soil and tells stories no one else hears. Did you make him? She asked. I did. Maya watched Mia's eyes widen with wonder. The girl clutched the tiny figure and whispered, Can I keep him? Ezekiel paused, then nodded. He's been waiting for the right listener. Mia beamed, holding the figure gently like it might break. Later, as the fire crackled and shadows danced along the cabin walls, Maya watched her daughter play silently with the tiny wooden man. She felt something strange, something heavy lifting from her chest. Guilt, maybe, or the persistent pressure of needing to be everywhere at once. It faded, just a little. Ezekiel sat nearby, drinking tea from a clay mug. He didn't speak, and neither did Maya. They didn't need to. That night, Maya tucked Mia in, brushing hair from her forehead. Do you like it here? She asked. Mia nodded. It's like a secret, but not scary. Maya kissed her temple. I'm glad. In the corner, Dr. Root stood on the windowsill, facing the trees. When Maya returned to the armchair, Ezekiel handed her another mug. No questions? She asked, taking it. Only one, he said. Do you think you'll stay one more night? She sipped. The tea was warm, spiced, grounding. Yes, she said softly. One more. And maybe, though she didn't say it out loud, she meant more than just a night. The 4th morning dawned softer than the ones before. Mist clung to the trees like breath on a mirror, and beams of golden sunlight filtered through the pines. Maya stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the steam from her tea curl into the air. Behind her, Mia still slept soundly, one arm flung over the side of the couch, clutching the wooden figure of Dr. Root. She took a deep breath, inhaling the quiet. It didn't feel foreign anymore. Ezekiel entered from the back porch, his boots dusted with dew and forest moss. He held a basket filled with fresh herbs, lemon balm, yarrow, lavender. You're up early, he said, nodding toward her mug. I didn't sleep much, she replied, though not in the usual way. Not because I couldn't, just didn't want to miss the quiet. He set the basket down, his expression unreadable but calm. You're adjusting faster than most. I'm not most, Maya said reflexively, then caught herself. Sorry, force of habit. Ezekiel chuckled, pulling off his gloves. It's fine. Most people don't admit that part out loud. She leaned against the window frame, sipping again. How long have you lived here? 10 years, give or take. Alone, mostly. A few visitors here and there. Some stay longer than others. Maya glanced around the cabin, noting the smooth wear of the wood floors, the hand-carved shelves, the way everything had a place and everything was used. There was nothing decorative for the sake of aesthetics-only intention. And before this? She asked. Ezekiel shrugged. Medical school. Then I opened a clinic in Asheville. But after my mom passed, I needed air, time, the kind you can't find in hospitals or cities. Maya's voice softened. I'm sorry. He nodded, accepting the sympathy with the grace of someone who no longer flinched from it. She used to live here. This was her cabin, her books, her herbs. She taught me how to listen first to her, then to the world. Maya stepped closer to the kitchen table, where the herbal basket sat. So this is more than just a house. It's memory and medicine. They fell into a comfortable silence. Maya watched as Ezekiel sorted the herbs with practiced hands, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. Her phone, for the first time in years, remained untouched in her bag. When Mia finally woke, she walked barefoot to the table, yawning. "Can we go outside?" Ezekiel smiled. "Only if your mom says so." Maya glanced down at her daughter, who looked brighter, lighter, more alive than she had in weeks. "Bundle up and wear shoes." They spent the morning in the backyard behind the cabin. Ezekiel showed Mia how to identify mint and wild thyme, teaching her to crush the leaves gently between her fingers and smell the oils. Maya watched her daughter skip between the plants, her laughter weaving through the trees. It wasn't loud, but it was real. It echoed off the bark and soaked into the soil. "You're good with her," Maya said quietly to Ezekiel, who knelt beside a patch of sage. "She reminds me of my niece, curious but careful." "You have family?" "Scattered," he replied. "Some in Georgia, a brother out west. We talk occasionally." She hesitated. "Do they know where you are?" He looked up. "They know. They just don't always understand why I'm here." Maya knelt beside him. "I don't know why I'm here either. I mean, I know the surface reasons Mia was having episodes. I needed a break. My therapist pushed for something remote. But none of this was planned. Sometimes what we don't plan is what we need most." She nodded, touching the tip of a mint leaf. "I don't think I've stopped moving in 15 years. Even after my husband died, I kept going. I didn't want to feel like everything had paused." Ezekiel studied her face, but didn't interrupt. "I thought if I stopped, everything would collapse. And Mia, she didn't know how to grieve because I didn't teach her. I just kept working." There was a long pause before Ezekiel said, "Grief's a heavy backpack. You can ignore it, but it never stops pressing down until you take it off." Maya blinked, her eyes suddenly stinging. They went back inside when the clouds thickened again. While Mia napped, Maya helped Ezekiel prepare more herbal blends, labeling jars in tidy handwriting, asking about ratios and combinations. "She's sleeping easier," Maya noted. "She's not carrying your worry anymore." Maya paused. "That's not fair." "It's not judgment," Ezekiel said gently. "It's recognition. You were doing the best you could, but sometimes we pass down weight without realizing it." That evening, Ezekiel made a stew with potatoes, onions, and smoked salt. They ate around the small table while the wind howled softly outside. After dinner, Mia climbed into Maya's lap, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "Can we stay here one more day?" she whispered. Maya looked at Ezekiel. He didn't pressure. He simply waited. "We'll see," Maya said softly, stroking Mia's hair. Later, while Ezekiel cleaned the dishes and Mia played with Dr. Root near the fire, Maya stepped onto the porch again. The night was thick with silence, but it no longer unnerved her. Ezekiel joined her after a few minutes, 2 mugs in hand. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked him. "Sometimes. But every time I pack, something tells me to stay. Maybe it's the trees," she said, half smiling. "Maybe it's something deeper." She sipped the tea. "This place feels like it remembers people." "It does. Memory clings to spaces. You just have to be still long enough to hear it." Maya turned to him. "I don't think I've ever been still. Not really." He met her eyes. "You're learning." She looked away quickly, flustered by how true it felt. Inside, Mia yawned, curling up on the rug. The fire danced across her face. Maya whispered, "She's healing. I can see it." "So are you," Ezekiel replied. And for once, Maya didn't argue. She just stood there, letting the silence hold her. The sun rose slowly on their 5th morning at the cabin, casting a golden shimmer across the frost-speckled ground. Maya awoke to the scent of cinnamon and cedar. She blinked the sleep from her eyes and sat up in the armchair, surprised again by how deeply she'd slept. There was a time not long ago when even 2 hours uninterrupted was a gift. Now, she was beginning to forget what it felt like to wake up tired. Mia was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her small fingers gently brushing through dried lavender stems Ezekiel had laid out the night before. She hummed quietly, Dr. Root propped up beside her like a guardian. "Morning, little one," Ezekiel called softly from the kitchen. "You're up early." Mia nodded. "He told me a story." "Dr. Root did?" he asked, smiling as he cracked an egg into a pan. She nodded seriously. "He said the mint remembers my laugh." Ezekiel caught Maya's eye across the room, both amused and deeply moved. Maya mouthed the word thank you without speaking. As breakfast came together, scrambled eggs, roasted sweet potatoes, and fresh cornbread, Maya found herself doing something she hadn't done since college. She set the table. Plates, forks, napkins folded neatly. It was a small act, but intimate, grounding. "Is there a market nearby?" she asked over breakfast. "Closest town's about 15 miles down the road," Ezekiel replied. "They've got a co-op, some basics. Why?" "I was thinking of cooking dinner tonight." He raised a brow. "You cook? Don't look so surprised," she said, half smiling. "I had a life before takeout and catered boardroom lunches. I'd be honored." After breakfast, Ezekiel suggested a walk to the lower ridge where a stream cut through the forest. "It's calm today," he said. "Might do you both good." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "Let me get Mia's coat." The trail was damp but walkable, lined with tall birch and spruce trees. Mia skipped ahead, her hair bouncing beneath her knitted hat, occasionally darting off to investigate patches of moss or fallen pine cones. Maya walked alongside Ezekiel, their strides matching without effort. "You always this quiet on walks?" she asked. "Mostly. Noise doesn't travel well in places like this. Silence listens better." She glanced at him. "I think you like being misunderstood, only when it gives people space to think differently." At the stream, Mia tossed small pebbles into the water and sang softly to herself. Maya knelt beside her, brushing leaves from her coat, then looked up at Ezekiel. "Do you think this is good for her?" He didn't answer immediately. "She's playing again. That's a good sign. Kids don't fake joy. They either have it or they don't." Maya swallowed, watching her daughter with new eyes. "I used to think the best I could give her was protection," she said. "Structure, safety. But maybe she needed presence." "She needed you to pause," Ezekiel said gently. "And maybe you needed her to remind you how." They lingered by the water until Mia began to tire, then headed back to the cabin. Maya offered to take the lead on dinner, and Ezekiel loaned her the old pickup parked behind the shed. "Drive's a little crooked," he warned, tossing her the keys. "Just like its owner." She laughed. "I'll manage." The drive into town was a jolt back into the modern world-paved roads, blinking gas station signs, the faint buzz of AM radio. But it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. The co-op was small but well-stocked. She picked up vegetables, broth, a loaf of sourdough, and a small bar of chocolate she didn't need but wanted anyway. Back at the cabin, Mia was resting again, cheeks rosy from the cold air. Maya chopped onions, while Ezekiel prepared a pot of herbal tea. "She's been drawing," he said, handing Maya a steaming mug. "What?" "Your daughter. She's been sketching the cabin, the fire, the trees." Maya felt a pang of guilt, of awe. I didn't even know she liked to draw. She might not have known either. Until now. The stew simmered for hours, filling the cabin with the scent of thyme and garlic. Mia woke up in time for dinner and helped set the table, humming to herself as she placed the mismatched forks beside the plates. As they ate, Ezekiel reached into a small cabinet and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He handed it to Mia. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a tiny hand-carved figure of fox with delicate ears and a soft curl to its tail. "This is for you," Ezekiel said. "Dr. Root's companion." Mia's face lit up. She whispered, "What's his name?" "You tell me," Ezekiel replied. She cradled the fox in her hands. "His name is Whisper." Maya touched her daughter's hand, smiling. After dinner, as Mia curled up with her two wooden companions, Maya lingered at the table, sipping tea beside Ezekiel. "Why do you make those?" she asked softly. "The figures?" She nodded. He took a moment before answering. "Because not everything worth saying comes out in words. Some things need shape, weight, texture." Maya looked over at her daughter, her cheeks relaxed, her fingers wrapped gently around small carved dreams. "I haven't seen her this peaceful since before her father died," she said. Ezekiel looked at her, and in that glance, there was no pity-only presence. "She remembers joy," he said. "Sometimes it just takes the right space." Maya didn't reply. But deep down, a part of her started to believe it too. That night, when she tucked Mia in, her daughter whispered, "Do you think Dr. Root and Whisper will come with us when we go?" Maya smoothed her daughter's hair. "I think they already have." In the stillness of the cabin, with firelight flickering and quiet settling in like an old friend, Maya found herself writing something in her journal, a habit she'd abandoned years ago. Just one sentence. Some silences don't ask for filling, they ask for listening. And for the first time in a long, long while, She listened. Spring melted gently into early summer. What was supposed to be a 3-day retreat had turned into 6 months of something Maya hadn't planned for, a life that felt nothing like the one she'd built, and yet strangely more hers than anything before. The leaves outside the cabin had turned from tender green buds into broad, swaying canopies. The path to the stream was worn smooth by Mia's small boots, and the silence, once strange and almost oppressive, had become a companion constant, comforting. Maya now split her weeks between the cabin and rare trips to the city. Her board had initially resisted her slowing down, but she negotiated from a distance, streamlined projects, delegated ruthlessly, and then stopped answering calls after 6 p.m. She started signing emails with a single sentence: "Please direct all urgent matters to my team, unless someone is bleeding." At the cabin, life moved slower. Meals were shared without screens. Books were read aloud on rainy days. Mia blossomed like the herbs in Ezekiel's garden, vivid, sturdy, and quietly joyful. One afternoon, Maya stood on the porch, watching Mia and Ezekiel tend to a row of calendula. Mia had her sleeves rolled up and a serious expression on her face, echoing Ezekiel's calm instructions. Her braids had bits of leaf tangled in them, and her cheeks were flushed with sun. "She's learning more out here than she ever did in that private school," Maya said aloud, not sure who she was speaking to, herself or the wind. Inside the cabin, Maya had begun organizing the bookshelves, cataloging Ezekiel's massive library of herbal texts and medical journals. He wasn't sentimental, but he'd never had the time or energy to sort them. Now, with Maya's precision and Mia's curiosity, everything was being gently dusted and labeled. One evening, after Mia had fallen asleep with Whisper curled beside her, Maya stood in the kitchen with a cup of valerian tea, watching Ezekiel stoke the fire. There was a calm between them now, a rhythm unspoken but palpable. They had found a way to coexist in the same space, their energies no longer clashing but folding together like waves in still water. "I thought I needed to be always doing something to feel real," she said quietly. "That if I stopped moving, I'd vanish." Ezekiel stirred the fire without looking up. Stillness is different from disappearing. She sat beside him, drawing her knees up. "I used to think healing had to be loud. You know, like crying in therapy, breaking dishes, making big changes. But this is so quiet. Real healing usually is," he said. "It grows underground before you ever see it bloom." There were other things blooming too, feelings Maya wasn't ready to name, not yet. Ezekiel had a way of showing up without crowding her. He offered space, not solutions. And the more time she spent around him, the more she realized how rare that was. They never talked about what this was. There were no declarations, no late-night confessions, just moments. Quiet glances over tea, shared laughter over Mia's observations. Long walks where their shoulders sometimes brushed and neither of them pulled away. One day, Maya found herself in the small room Ezekiel rarely entered, the one he had called his mother's room. It wasn't locked, just untouched. The dust was soft, not neglectful, but reverent. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a crocheted shawl draped over the back. On a table, dried flowers lay beside a framed photo of a smiling woman with eyes like Ezekiel's. Maya didn't move anything. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped, breathing in the stories hanging in the air. Ezekiel found her there later. He didn't raise his voice or question why she'd gone in. He simply leaned against the doorframe and said, "That chair creaks." She loved that about it. "She looks kind," Maya said, nodding toward the photograph. "She was fierce," he replied, "but never in a way that made others small." They stood there a moment longer before Maya quietly stepped out, brushing past him with something unspoken passing between them. Respect, gratitude, something else. That night, she found herself awake longer than usual, not from stress, but from stillness too rich to ignore. She took her journal and sat by the window, the cabin silent, save for the occasional crack of the fire. She wrote, "He doesn't rush me, and maybe that's why I keep coming back." A week later, a letter arrived. Ezekiel handed it to her over breakfast. It was from one of Maya's former colleagues, asking if she'd be willing to keynote an international conference on sustainable development and ethical investment. Maya skimmed the letter, then skimmed it again. "You should do it," Ezekiel said. "I don't want to leave." "You don't have to leave to show up." She looked at him. "You're full of those, aren't you?" "Only when I need to be." She did accept the invitation, but she gave a different kind of talk than expected. No PowerPoint, no metrics, just her voice, telling a story about a cabin, a sick little girl, a doctor who listened more than he spoke, and a woman who learned that control was not the same as care. It went viral, not for what she said, but how she said "Itra," honest, without polish. Back at the cabin, Mia met her at the door with a drawing a house nestled among trees, with 3 figures in the yard, one with a braid, one with a beard, and one small with arms stretched wide. "That's us," Mia said proudly, "and the garden's going to be even bigger." Maya held the drawing to her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, it will." She looked up at Ezekiel, who had stepped onto the porch, his eyes soft, no words, just presence. And sometimes, that's all the answer you need. It was late July when the garden reached its peak. Rows of echinacea, lemon balm, lavender, and basil buzzed with bees, while the air filled with the scent of ripening earth and sun-warmed herbs. Ezekiel had spent the morning with Mia planting marigolds near the cabin windows to keep the bugs honest, he joked. Maya watched them from the porch, sipping a glass of cold herbal tea and pretending not to smile every time Mia laughed. The rhythm of life here had grown almost too comfortable. Meals flowed easily into conversations into quiet evenings, and those evenings into a sense of something deeper. Maya had started keeping a small basket of her own herbal blend simple mixtures. Ezekiel helped her prepare but let her label herself. She named them things like stillness, truth, and let go. That afternoon, while Mia painted in the corner of the cabin, Maya and Ezekiel sat outside under the oak tree at the edge of the clearing. The shade was thick, the breeze slow and forgiving. Ezekiel pulled his hat lower over his brow as Maya leaned back against the tree trunk beside him. "You know," she said, "I'm not sure I could go back." "To the city?" he asked, eyes still closed. "To that version of me." Ezekiel nodded slowly. "Sometimes the version we think we have to be is just the armor." "I wore it long enough," she whispered. "Maybe too long." There was a pause. Ezekiel reached into the pocket of his flannel and pulled out a folded paper. "I was thinking of showing you this." Maya took the paper, unfolded it. It was a rough map hand-drawn, marked with notes in neat, firm script. It showed the entire ridge, the surrounding forest, streams, and trails. But one corner, highlighted and labeled in red ink, caught her eye. "What's this?" she asked. "That's the ancestral grove," he said. "The land my family has lived on since before I was born. It's where my grandfather taught me to find sassafras, where my mother built her first greenhouse. It's where her ashes were scattered." Maya nodded slowly. "It's beautiful. I take people there sometimes," Ezekiel continued, "but only when they understand what it means to walk with memory." She looked up at him, touched. "You want to take me there?" "I do." The next morning, they set out after breakfast. Mia stayed behind with an older neighbor who visited occasionally and adored the little girl like a granddaughter. Maya and Ezekiel hiked for nearly an hour through thick groves of pine and oak, their boots crunching along the soft dirt path. The grove was exactly as he'd described, quiet, sacred, sunlight filtered through high branches, making the leaves glow like stained glass. At the center stood a weathered bench and an old oak tree with bark, so gnarled it looked like ancient hands. "This was her tree," he said, brushing his palm over the trunk. "She used to say it was older than forgiveness." Maya reached out, touching the bark gently. "She sounds extraordinary." She was. They sat in silence for a long time. Maya rested her head back against the tree, feeling the deep, living pulse of the place. It was then that she, without planning to, began talking about the next project her board had been asking her to consider. "It's a conservation resort hybrid," she said. "Eco-conscious, sustainable design, low carbon footprint. We've been scouting forest land in North Carolina, not too far from here." Ezekiel didn't respond. Maya went on. "We'd preserve large areas of green space, build around nature, not over it. It could be a model for ethical development." Ezekiel stood slowly. Maya paused. "What?" He turned to her, jaw tight. "You said not far from here." "Yes. Why? Where exactly?" She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded brochure she'd brought to show him, hoping he'd see it as a gesture of trust. "Here," she said, handing it over. "I thought maybe we could." But the moment he looked at the map, she saw his face change. His eyes scanned the parcel numbers, the outline, the red-inked plot. This is it, he said, his voice low. This is my family's land. Maya's breath caught. What? That can't be right. You didn't know, he said, stepping back. Of course you didn't, because this is just another project to you. That's not fair, she whispered. Ezekiel's voice rose, not in volume, but in weight. You sat in my mother's house. You slept under her roof. You watched your daughter laugh in a garden she designed. And now you're planning to bulldoze the only place I still have her? I wasn't Ezekiel. I swear I didn't know. But now you do, he said, folding the paper slowly, methodically. And I need you to leave. The words struck like a stone thrown through stained glass. She stepped forward. Please don't do this. He shook his head. There are rooms in that cabin I've never let anyone touch. A drawer full of letters my mother wrote. Her rocking chair still creaks the same way it did when she passed. And now I see that none of this meant anything to you. That's not true, Maya said, her voice breaking. But Ezekiel had turned. Pack your things. Be gone before sunset. Maya stood alone in the grove, the air suddenly colder. She stared at the red-inked line on the paper, realizing too late what it had cost her to carry that map in her pocket. Back at the cabin, Mia looked up as Maya entered. Are we leaving? Yes, baby, Maya said softly, kneeling to gather their things. But why? Maya couldn't find the words. She could only whisper, because some mistakes can't be unmade. That night, the cabin doors closed behind them for what Maya feared might be the last time. The stars were brilliant in the sky, unblinking, indifferent, and as they drove down the mountain road, silence filled the Carnot, the comfortable kind Ezekiel had taught her to love, but the kind that reminded her of everything she'd just lost. The apartment in Manhattan felt smaller than Maya remembered. Maybe it was the silence, which rang sharp instead of soft. Or maybe it was the way her footsteps echoed off the hardwood floors, too loud in a space that no longer knew the sound of her daughter's laughter. Mia barely spoke the first few days after they returned. She spent most of her time in the reading nook, sketching trees, rivers, and two small wooden figures, Dr. Root and Whisper. They sat propped on the sill, gazing out the window toward a skyline that offered no answers. Maya tried to resume her routine. She attended video calls, reviewed proposals, and responded to dozens of emails marked urgent. But everything tasted like cardboard, felt mechanical. She moved through meetings like a ghost, her mind never fully in the room. Colleagues praised her clarity and renewed focus, but she knew it was just the hollow precision of someone who no longer had anything left to feel. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered into Mia's room and found her daughter awake, curled beneath a blanket, whispering to the two carved figures on the window ledge. "What are you saying?" Maya asked gently, sitting beside her. Mia turned to her. "I'm telling them to keep him company." Maya didn't ask who. She knew. The weight of guilt settled over her like fog. "He didn't mean to be cruel," she said quietly. "He was protecting something important." "Were we not important too?" Mia asked, her voice small but steady. Maya's throat tightened. "We are, but I hurt him, and when people hurt that deeply, they protect by pushing away." Mia didn't respond, but her hand reached for Maya's and held it tightly. In the mornings, Maya sat by her kitchen window with a mug of tea she brewed from a blend Ezekiel had once called grounding. It didn't taste the same, maybe because the air was different here, or maybe because she wasn't the same woman who had once sat beside a fire while someone else stirred a pot in silence, listening more than he spoke. She thought of the grove often, the red line on the map, the way Ezekiel's face had closed, piece by piece, as realization dawned. And the words he had said, "Be gone before," sunset echoed louder than any argument she had ever had with anyone. One afternoon, while reviewing a new investment pitch, Maya paused at the third page. The company was proposing a luxury wellness retreat on the outskirts of North Carolina. She clicked the file closed, stared at her screen, then shut the laptop altogether. She opened a drawer and pulled out the only physical file she'd brought back from the cabin's blueprint of the development site she had once hoped to show Ezekiel as a vision of shared purpose. Now it was just paper, cold, clinical, and cruel in its precision. She folded it slowly, carefully, and then tore it into 4 deliberate pieces. Maya stood and walked to her bookshelf. She pulled out a blank journal and wrote one sentence on the first page. Some lines should never be drawn. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished, unspoken. She got out of bed and sat on the living room floor, surrounded by Mia's drawings. One caught her eye, a watercolor of the cabin, drawn from memory. The oak tree, the porch. 3 figures, one with a braid, one tall and quiet, and one small, arms lifted toward the sun. She reached for her phone, scrolled past dozens of contacts, paused on one name she hadn't dared to text since they left. Ezekiel Brooks. Her thumb hovered, then lowered. Number, not yet. Instead, she wrote him a letter. She didn't apologize in it, not because she didn't feel sorry, but because she understood now that apologies without action were empty. She didn't ask for forgiveness, or even a response. She simply told him what had changed. I tore up the contracts. I won't build anything there. I stepped away from the project. The land is safe. But I know that doesn't fix what I broke. I don't expect anything. I only wanted you to know that your mother's garden is still growing inside me, inside Mia. Thank you for every quiet moment you gave us. M. She mailed it the next morning, then took Mia to the botanical garden uptown. They walked through rows of wildflowers and tall grasses. Mia pointed out plants she remembered from the cabin, naming them as if they were old friends. They sat on a bench beneath a willow tree, where Maya took a deep breath and said, I don't know if we'll go back, but if we do, would you want to? Mia nodded. If he wants us to. Back at home, the apartment didn't feel bigger, but it didn't feel like a cage anymore either. It was just a place, a pause, a waiting room for a new season. A week later, Maya found herself waking before dawn, as she had often done at the cabin. She brewed a cup of tea's time with fresh mint she'd started growing in a pot by the window. She sat, the city still quiet, and looked toward the sunrise. No reply had come. Not yet. But she felt something shift, not in the room, not in the sky, but in herself. A silence that didn't ache, just waited. The envelope sat unopened on the corner of the table in Ezekiel's cabin for 3 days. He hadn't touched it, though he saw it every time he passed the kitchen, every time he set down his mug, every time he placed a new bundle of drying herbs on the rack. He didn't recognize the handwriting at first, not in its quiet, curved restraint, but something in his chest had. On the 4th morning, he opened it. He didn't read it all at once. He read the first paragraph, then stood up and walked outside. He split firewood with more force than usual, his breath short, jaw tight. Later, he came back in, read the next section by the fireplace. By the time he reached the final lines, he was sitting on the edge of his mother's old rocking chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. She tore it up, he said aloud, though no one was there to hear him. She tore it up. He folded the letter, not into its envelope, but into his coat pocket. Then he stared out the window for a long time. That evening he walked the trail to the grove. The wind had picked up. Leaves scattered around his boots like forgotten words. He stood beneath the old oak tree and whispered. She didn't know. And when she did, she chose different. The tree didn't answer, but the breeze softened, and something in him eased. In Manhattan, Maya moved as if waiting for a signal she couldn't name. Every morning, she checked the mail with no real expectation. She went to work with no urgency. Mia returned to school part-time, and her drawings shifted from memories of the cabin to imagined scenes of it reimagined. One included a garden gate with a welcome sign, another, a table set for 3. On a Friday evening, 2 weeks after she'd mailed the letter, Maya and Mia returned home from the bookstore to find a small, worn box outside their apartment door. There was no note, no return address. Inside, wrapped in a soft linen cloth, was a wooden figure, a tall woman with long, carved hair, holding hands with a smaller figure who wore a scarf. Between them stood a tiny fox, tail curled proudly. Mia gasped when she saw it. "It's us," she whispered. "It's us," and whisper. Maya turned the base of the carving and found a single word etched in block letters. Home. She sat down hard on the hallway floor, the weight of the carving in her hands, and for the first time since they'd left the cabin, she cried. Not out of grief, not out of guilt, out of recognition. 3 days later, they packed. Not everything, just what mattered. Mia insisted on bringing both Dr. Root and Whisper, carefully tucking them into her backpack like sacred things. Maya took the letter Ezekiel had never written but somehow had spoken through the carving. She didn't call ahead. She didn't want to ask permission for something that had to be offered freely. The drive back to the mountain felt both endless and fleeting. As the city dissolved into forest, Maya realized she was no longer afraid of being unwelcome. She was prepared to wait outside the gate if needed. She'd learned at last how to wait without demanding. They arrived just after sunset. The path to the cabin was lit by the fading gold of dusk. Mia held her mother's hand tightly, the backpack slung over one shoulder. The cabin looked the same, a little more overgrown perhaps. A new bundle of herbs drying under the porch, but it pulsed with the same quiet heartbeat Maya remembered. They stood at the edge of the clearing, no words, just breath. Then, the door opened. Ezekiel stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Maya started to speak, but he lifted a hand not to silence, but to still. Mia stepped forward first, unzipping her backpack. She pulled out the carving and held it up in both hands. Ezekiel took it gently, turned it over, saw the word he'd etched himself weeks before, not knowing if it would ever reach them. He looked at Maya. "Is it okay if we're just here for a while?" she asked. Not to explain, not to rebuild, just to be. He nodded once. They stepped forward. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and mint. Nothing had changed, but everything felt new. Mia went to her corner without being told, setting up Dr. Root and Whisper beside the new carving. Maya stood awkwardly, not knowing where to sit. Ezekiel poured 2 mugs of tea and handed her one. She looked at him. "What is this?" "A blend called Begin Again." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and took a sip. And in that moment, there were no speeches, no promises, just steam curling between them, and the slow return of a rhythm they both knew by heart. A silence that didn't separate, but welcomed. A silence that had never stopped listening. And this time, they knew how to speak through it, together. The rhythm came back quietly, not all at once but piece by piece, like the way moss grows along old stone soft, certain and steady. The mornings resumed their gentle rituals, tea brewed before words were spoken, the clinking of cups replacing the alarm of city life, the warm hush of dawn not broken but honored. Maya found herself waking earlier, not from urgency but from anticipation. She rose to the scent of Ezekiel's cedar soap, to the rustle of Mia's feet slipping into slippers, to the sound of the cabin settling into its bones like it was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Ezekiel had not asked questions about what she had done or what she had left behind. She hadn't offered explanations. That space between themons, carved with tension, now felt like fertile ground, something ready to be cultivated. They spoke more now, but only when it mattered. There were no apologies, only offerings of presence. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Ezekiel passed Maya a hand-drawn flyer. The top read, "Roots and Remedies, a community healing garden." "I've been working on this," he said, fingers grazing the paper's edge. "With or without funding, I think it's time." Maya studied the sketch-space that merged his garden and knowledge with a gathering place for teaching, learning, and care. A circular layout surrounded by native plants, benches, a small open-air structure for shade and lessons. It was modest, but intentional. This is beautiful," she said softly. "I thought maybe you'd want to help organize it. Not as a funder," he added quickly, "but as someone who knows how to build things that last." She folded the flyer in her lap, holding it like something sacred. "Only if I can build it with my hands this time." And so, they began. Word spread slowly, the way all good things do in quiet towns. By autumn, neighbors started stopping by with spare tools, old seeds, reclaimed wood. A retired carpenter from down the road offered to help build the trellises. A woman from town, once one of Ezekiel's patients, brought jars of pickled vegetables and stayed to weed the garden beds. Maya reached out to her network, not to pitch, but to invite. A handful of wellness professionals, herbalists, and teachers offered to host workshops or donate supplies. There were no sponsorship banners, no logos, just people, showing up, planting, learning. Mia was the heartbeat of it all. She guided visitors through the garden with her quiet knowledge, naming plants, explaining how to crush the leaves to release their scent. She carried Dr. Root in her pocket and often set him on the edge of the teaching bench like a mascot watching over the garden's lessons. One afternoon, Maya sat with Ezekiel on the edge of the raised beds, dirt under her fingernails, sweat streaking her brow. They watched a group of children gather around Mia, who was showing them how to make simple herbal pouches from muslin and dried lavender. "She's not the same child who left this cabin," Maya said. "No," Ezekiel agreed. "But she's more herself than ever." Maya looked at him. "So am I." That night, after the last guest left and the tools were put away, they sat on the porch beneath a sky thick with stars. The air held the first bite of fall. Maya leaned her head on Ezekiel's shoulder, and he didn't flinch. He simply placed a hand over hers and let it rest there. "I used to think healing was about fixing what broke," she said. "And now I think it's about growing something new where the break happened." Ezekiel nodded, his voice low. "That's what roots do. They grow around the damage. They anchor deeper." Silence stretched between them, but it didn't feel like space. It felt like agreement. In the weeks that followed, the garden became more than a project. It became part of the landscape, and slowly, so did Maya. People started calling her by nomino, the full one, not Miss Langston, but Maya, with ease and warmth. She was no longer a guest. She was part of the soil. She still took calls from New York occasionally, but more often she turned them down. She began writing not reports or proposals, but essays, thoughts, observations. She even recorded a podcast episode, a special one-off titled Returning to Root, where she shared the story of the garden, the silence, the slow redemption. She ended the recording with a question. What if healing isn't something we chase? What if it's something we return to, one step, one seed, one still moment at a time? She didn't check the metrics. She didn't care. The garden bloomed well into the first frost. Even when the color faded, the structure remained. Ezekiel added wind chimes made from old spoons and metal lids. Mia strung up dried corn husks and feathers. On Thanksgiving, they hosted a small gathering. No big speeches, just food, fire, and community. Ezekiel made stew. Maya baked cornbread from scratch. Someone brought mulled cider in an old thermos and passed it around. Mia stood at the front of the garden and read a short poem she'd written about trees that remember. Afterward, as dusk settled in, Maya stood beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the grove, the one where Ezekiel had once told her to leave. He joined her without a word. She turned to him, eyes soft. "You never said why you carved that little statue for us," she said. Ezekiel looked toward the stars. "Because sometimes, when you can't say come back, you leave something that might lead the way." She stepped closer. "It did." He nodded. "I know." And then, without ceremony or fear, they leaned into each other not as apology, not as resolution, but as continuation. A next breath, a next page. Inside, the cabin glowed. Outside, the roots dug deeper. And in that moment, neither of them needed to say a thing. The first snow came early that year, settling gently across the ridge like a quiet blessing. It didn't blanket the world in silence, softened what was already still, wrapping every branch and rooftop in a hush that felt earned, not imposed. The garden had gone dormant, its once vibrant colors replaced by brittle stalks and seeds asleep beneath the soil. But even in its rest, it radiated life. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled. Maya stirred a pot of stew on the stove while Mia sat cross-legged near the hearth, sketching winter trees in her notebook. Ezekiel was outside splitting logs, a scarf wrapped loosely around his neck, his breath misting in the crisp morning air. This, Maya thought, watching the steam rise from the pot, was a life, not a retreat, not a detour, but a place to root. By noon, the three of them had settled around the table for lunch. Ezekiel had brought in bread from a neighbor who traded loaves for dried herbs. Mia chatted animatedly about an idea she had to add a section of story plants to the garden next spring, each plant paired with a tale or a memory. "That sounds like a whole curriculum," Ezekiel said with a smile. "I can teach it," Mia said proudly. "I believe you can," Maya added, brushing a crumb from her daughter's cheek. After lunch, Maya walked the perimeter of the garden with Ezekiel. The snow crunched beneath their boots, but the air wasn't harsh. It held a promise of rebirth. Maya wore a long wool coat she'd once bought for city winters. It felt heavier here, but somehow more grounded. They paused by the trellises where tomatoes had once tangled. "I used to think success was measured by speed," she said. "By how fast I could finish something, close a deal, land the next project." Ezekiel didn't interrupt. "But here," she continued, "everything teaches patience. The earth, the fire, even Mia." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "And yourself?" She exhaled. "I'm still learning." That evening, after dinner, they gathered in the small room Ezekiel had once kept as his mother's sanctuary. Over the months, it had evolved, not altered, not dismantled, but gently embraced. The rocking chair remained, the shelf of handwritten journals untouched. But now, alongside them, were additions. A bundle of lavender Mia had tied with a blue ribbon, a sketch Maya had made of the garden in full bloom, and a small wooden sign that read, "Remember gently." Maya sat in the rocking chair for the first time. It creaked, just as Ezekiel had warned, and the sound brought a smile to both their faces. "I used to be afraid of this room," she admitted. "Not because it was hers, but because it held so much history I didn't feel worthy to enter." "You were never unworthy," Ezekiel said, "just not ready." She nodded, brushing her fingers along the edge of the chair. "And now? Now you're part of the story." That night, while Mia slept under her quilt with Dr. Root and Whisper tucked beside her, Maya and Ezekiel sat on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the snow fall. Maya reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I started writing again," she said. "Not for work, for myself." Ezekiel took the page from her, read it in the glow of the lantern beside them. It was a poem, short, simple, about roots that hold on even when the surface breaks. He handed it back. "You should read that aloud at the spring gathering." She laughed. "I'm not that brave." "You are," he said. "You just forgot." The next morning, Mia led a group of neighborhood children through the snow-dusted garden paths, her voice soft but confident as she explained which plants would return in spring. She pointed to a small circle in the center of the garden, newly designated for the Whisper Grove, a space for quiet stories, slow thoughts, and moments that didn't need explaining. Maya stood back, watching her daughter with a warmth she couldn't name. Not pride, exactly, not relief, something deeper, a knowing. "She's growing up," she whispered to Ezekiel. "She's growing in," he corrected. Later that week, Maya received a letter from the city. A formal offer to return to the corporate world in executive position, impressive title, generous salary. She read it once, then again, then folded it, placed it in her drawer, and didn't mention it to anyone. Instead, she poured herself a cup of tea, sat by the fire, and added a line to her journal. "I used to build towers, now I grow gardens." That evening she told Ezekiel, "There's no going back, is there?" "Not to who you were," he replied, "but maybe toward who you're meant to be." She nodded. "Then let's keep going." And so, they did. Not toward an ending, but toward season-stowed growth, pause, renewal, toward a future planted one seed at a time. The cabin held their laughter, the garden held their stories, the silence, once feared, now held them all. And outside, beneath the snow, the roots waited patient, alive, ready. The spring thaw came slowly, but when it did, it was like the earth exhaled. Snow melted into the roots of what had been sleeping, and the garden began to stir. Shoots pushed through the damp soil, buds trembled on branches, and the soft murmur of bees returned to the air. Life did not announce its comeback with fanfare, it simply resumed. One morning, Maya stood at the edge of the garden with a clipboard in her hand, hair pulled back in a braid, her boots caked in mud. Ezekiel knelt nearby, checking the new growth of a sage bush, and Mia ran past them both, arms stretched wide like wings. The community had grown alongside the plants. What began as a few neighbors lending tools had become something else entirely, a center not of commerce or prestige, but of care. People came for herbal workshops, yes, but also for listening circles, book swaps, and warm bowls of soup on cool days. On the last Saturday in April, Maya hosted a spring gathering. The banner read simply, "Stories that heal." There was no stage, no microphones, just benches arranged in a loose circle around the garden center, where Mia had planted a flowering dogwood to mark one full year since she first arrived with a fever and a heart too quiet. The guests included the carpenter who had helped build the teaching pergola, the nurse from town who now taught plant-based first aid, and several elders from the Cherokee community who had been invited by Ezekiel to share their knowledge and presence. People brought food, stories, songs. Children played tag near the trellis where passionflower vines had begun to climb. When the time came for stories, Maya stood near the center, a single page folded in her hand. She hadn't planned to speak, but as she looked out at the circle at Mia seated between two older women who braided flowers into her hair, at Ezekiel leaning against a fence post with soil still on his sleeves, she stepped forward. "I used to think stories were something we told to explain things," she began, her voice clear but calm, "to justify, to persuade, to sell. But over this last year, I've learned that the most powerful stories don't explain, they reveal." She unfolded the page. "This is a letter I never mailed," she said. "It was written to someone I once hurt, someone I now call home." She read, "Dear stranger I once knew. I don't know how to write this without beginning again. And maybe that's the point. That beginnings are not grand. They are small, unfolding, the way roots break open stone over time. You taught me that justice isn't always loud, that sometimes it looks like a garden being protected, a child being listened to, a silence that isn't absence but reverence. I walked into your world thinking I knew how to build, but I didn't know how to stay. Not until I learned what staying costs and what it gives. I still dream about that first night in your cabin, when the fire popped and the rain hit the roof like a warning, and how, in that flickering light, a stranger taught me the most powerful kind of healing doesn't come in cures, it comes in care. If you're reading this, you already know how it ends, or rather, how it begins again, with us, with this, with roots and stories, and a silence that says, I'm here. M. When she finished, the circle was quiet in a way that was not awkward, but full of memory, full of meaning. Ezekiel didn't move toward her. He didn't have to. His presence was steady as ever, the way the earth simply remains. That evening, after the gathering, they returned to the cabin. Mia fell asleep early, her cheeks still flushed with sun and joy. Maya and Ezekiel sat on the steps of the porch, watching the moon rise above the ridge. I never imagined a life like this, Maya said, resting her head on his shoulder. Most people don't imagine peace, Ezekiel replied. They imagine escape. This is something we build. She closed her eyes. And it's enough? It's more than enough, he said. It's a life that remembers us while we're still living it. Maya looked out over the land. She could still remember the sound of her old life heels on marble floors, elevator dings, the endless hum of things that never truly rested, but they no longer pulled at her. I want to stay, she whispered, not just here, with you. He turned to her. You already are. The porch creaked beneath their weight. The wind moved gently through the garden, rustling the dogwood petals like pages turning. And in that quiet, Maya felt it not resolution, but wholeness. Not an ending, but a knowing that some roots grow where you least expect. That healing isn't a destination. It's a home, and they had arrived.